Robert, the thinker and the writer. Second, Robert, the people person, the man who talks to anyone about anything. Third, Robert, the lover of comfort. Fourth, and finally, Robert, the individual, his own man. First and most obviously, Robert is a thinker. I know of no one with his intellectual dexterity. And I remember when we first met him, my colleagues and I found him incredibly daunting until we realised that Robert is never out. Robert's never out to score points. He just loves ideas, he loves debating, and he loves debating with everyone, and I suspect he always has. In 1995, Robert wrote that he was already a prodigy. And I quote him. He's writing about history. He said, "Serious history started for me with the outline history of the world by Hamilton. At one time, I virtually knew that book by heart. By the age of 10, I had written my third history of the world." He goes on, "After that, I renounced the broad sweep for the monograph. My earliest childhood interest was ancient history. By 13, I had mastered the Anglo-Saxons." This was all before he joined the college. And the college's only contribution, as far as I can gather, in developing his intellect, seems to have been the then librarian's purchasing of terrible books for the library, which Skidelsky, the sub-librarian, gleefully reviewed. And I discovered his review of Tiberius, A Study in Resentment. And this is what the 17-year-old Skidelsky wrote. And I quote, "In this book, the defects of the scholarship are striking. But more surprisingly is the author's failure with the English language. The reader is confronted with a massive array of repellent clichés and numerous errors of form and taste. One can just excuse such horrible words as adventurous, crapulous, and sedentariness. But when we read for the second time of Agrippa chewing on the cud of his stupidity in exile, and of the fact that no one would put his hand in the fire on behalf of her virtue today, one wonders whether the author ought ever to have essayed the task of writing a book in English." End of review. And it wasn't only the language which offended the 17-year-old. He goes on. The author dismissed the persistent and well-founded traditions of the emperor's perverted orgies on Capri, with the comment, "Tiberius retired to the island, sick of the whole of humanity, with a mind in such a state, the body is in no mood for orgies." Skidelsky, age 17, confidently asserts, "The author is unconvincing, for surely it is arguable that if one loses respect for humanity, one no longer feels a moral repulsion in abusing individuals." Robert was also subjected to a couple of abysmally written plays, which he cheerfully reviewed despite playing in them, including The Broken Heart by John Ford, in which he played King Amyclas. And in his 1957 review of the play, the young Skidelsky wrote, "The play was," he quotes, "said not to have been performed for over 300 years. The reason," he writes, "for this is not far to seek, for the play would be classed as unstageable, at least from the box office viewpoint, by any professional company. The plot is long and untidy, extremely complicated. The extensive and mostly irrelevant comic relief scenes are dismal. Nevertheless, there was some highly amusing acting." Now, whether or not the college was in any way responsible for the development of Robert's prose, it certainly benefited from his lively contributions to the record. And Robert didn't just write about books or about plays. He also wrote about what was going on in the house. In 1958, he wrote this: "In common with the rest of the school, the boys in Chichester House were heavily struck by Asian flu. And after that, some people, especially the fags, developed the distressing habit of breaking their arms and other parts of their anatomy. The chief offender was undoubtedly Hutchins, who must be regarded reverently whenever he appears without some form of plaster or tumescence. Skidelsky's report ends, "Finally, we thank Matron for generally keeping us alive." That's the writer. Now, aside from his writing and his obvious intellect, the second thing we will all understand and know about Robert is his interest in people. What's amazing, when you travel with Robert, he chats to anyone about anything. And there are college pupils here today who have benefited from that. He sometimes meets them, he takes an interest in them, invites them up to the House of Lords to do work experience in his office, and he really does take a genuine interest in them thereafter. And two of those individuals are here today. Anastasia, now studying archaeology at Oxford, and Toby, applying to study history and economics at Oxford at the moment. In fact, Anastasia, who's from Russia, told me earlier that Robert is one of her two heroes in life. She said I'm the other. Robert's interest in other people, I thought that has he always had this interest in other people? So again, I dug in the records and found some interviews that Robert gave in the 1950s. And they're remarkable, really, because he was a schoolboy and he decided to go and interview all the schoolmasters and put it in the school magazine. And he wanted to interview them about their leisure pursuits. Now, in those days, people barely spoke to schoolmasters. But anyway, Skidelsky went to interview them. And this is one with a Mr. Frith, which he joyfully recorded in the magazine. And it goes like this. Mr. Skidelsky, Mr. Frith, what are your ambitions? The answer, my great aim is to have a country cottage. I will then be able to read the many books that I've never had time to read, and also to admire the garden, while my wife will be able to do the housework and garden. Skidelsky adds, Mr. Frith is a bachelor. And now to the third characteristic of Robert, his love of comfort, something which I know drives Gus mad. It's essentially that which precludes him from joining her on bracing hikes in the mountains of Croatia. Instead, as I travel the world with Robert, I've become used to seeing him book himself into manicures and pedicures, procuring fluffy slippers and pyjamas for himself on aeroplanes, brazenly charming stewardesses into upgrading him to first class. And he spent a fortune on hats. Red ones, blue ones, striped ones, fur hats. Within 5 minutes of taking him to a market in Oman, I remember him rushing into a store, and for half an hour he was trying on brightly coloured headdresses like a boy in a sweet shop. And all of that love of comfort started here. Because actually, when I read about the Robert of the 50s, he was famous for one thing. He decided to take issue with the discomfort in which the boys lived. And he became house captain of his house and then head of school. But in his first report as head of house in Chichester, he wrote, happily, at the end of term, he wrote this: a surprising and refreshing variety of decor greeted the house when it reassembled at the beginning of term. Armed with brushes, paints, rollers, trays, turps, rags, and other assorted commodities, a band of enthusiastic optimists, including this head of house, set about the thankless task of extracting beauty and comfort from studies sullied with cobwebs, dirt, smells, and secrets of past generations. At cost, no doubt, to many a painstaking lexicographer of the past, whose efforts to achieve immortality on chimney pieces, window ledges, beams, or walls were rudely swept away by the inexorable motion of the brushes, the study renovators achieved remarkable results. That was his house. He then took battle in the other houses. He moved on to Durnford House, and he wrote proudly, "In Durnford, the peculiar architectural design of the place banishes the study boys to well below ground level. It has something to do with the fecund exuberance of cockroaches and mice. 13 we caught yesterday, they told me proudly, in basement 2. It's a disgrace. There are hardly any respectable desks. There are hardly any armchairs from which straw is not protruding at some point. Floor coverings, either in the way of linoleum or carpets, have been universally neglected by the headmaster." And he was quick to argue that creature comforts might lead to an improvement in behaviour. Reflecting on the improvements he championed, he concluded in 1958, "The total impression of my headship is a most encouraging one, for there are signs of discontent with the slum life that the studies have fostered in the past, and there are now clear signs of the awakening of an intelligent interest in civilised modes of living." And then fourthly, there's Robert, the individual, his own man, not afraid to speak out, to do what he thinks is right. And you know, in the public sphere, this has meant speaking out, sometimes as a lone voice against austerity. In the past, it meant criticising airstrikes in Serbia. And again, I find traces of that in the young Robert all those years ago. It's worth reminding ourselves that the young Skidelsky joined the school when the place was decidedly unruly. In one episode, when Robert was in the upper fifth, so aged about 15, he wrote in his house report, "The prefects nearly brought off a major coup this term. Armed with bats, sticks, and other weapons, they sailed out in force on hearing strange noises, only to ambush the headmaster, who had just apprehended a poor misguided burglar, choosing the dead of night to make his entrance. Odd though it may be, we cannot understand anyone taking so much trouble to enter the grounds when so many others are trying to get out." In another episode, 2 boys in the room next to his appear to have been suspended for planting an explosive device in their house. Skidelsky commented laconically in his house report, "Casualties mercifully were small. Only 3 people were scalded, one of them very seriously." And yet, despite their creative enthusiasm for disruption, Skidelsky did take his house to new heights. In 1957, his predecessor as house captain wrote of his sad house, "The promise suggested by these happenings of a term filled with high drama and frenzy unfortunately failed to mature. Chichester House subsided to the more mundane activity for searching for sporting trophies, all of which eluded us with a persistence that was quite remarkable." But then Robert took charge. A year later, he wrote that the common room had mercifully been spared the usual explosions, and the most amazing success of the term came with our long-deserved victory, and his vice-captain recorded it as such. "This was Skidelsky's moment. The house's only trophy that year, but a proud moment. The CCF Marching Cup. With efficient slickness, our senior marching army squad, under the generalship of Skidelsky, marched off with the rifle drill cup." And so, today, Skidelsky marches off once more. His generalship is at an end, and I ask myself, did it really all begin here? I think not. I think the playful genius we all know and love was present well before he entered this place. But is the boy still in the man we see before us? I think very much so. And I hope that there'll be many more such boys and girls like Robert in the college in the future. It's been such a privilege to serve as one of Robert's two headmasters, and the school, its pupils, its parents, its teachers, all owe him a huge debt of gratitude. So thank you from me, Robert, for everything.
Thank you very much. Robert, continuing this celebration of you this evening, we're going to hear as a close friend in Parliament elsewhere. David.
What a joy it must be to come back to the school where you've been a pupil and to build it up and to achieve such excellence. Very few of us can boast of that, and I think it is a massive achievement. I must say, listening to the financial record of the college, I realised one of my many mistakes was not to have made him treasurer of the SDP. But I do think that it required a very special understanding of the challenges that we were going to face as a world to choose to be the biographer of John Maynard Keynes and to write 3 volumes which won 5 major literary prizes at a time when very few of us could see what was going to happen in the 21st century. And Robert really built a knowledge of that great economist, that great figure, which was worldwide. So when the crisis came, there was a large body of people who understood both the man and his thought processes and his vision and the depth of his analysis of the world economy. I sometimes wonder whether we would have been able to handle the crisis of 2009 and onwards if that 3 volumes had never been written. And I do think it is well worth us reflecting that a historian can make such a major contribution in the depth of knowledge that they leave, the legacy and the thought processes. And then, when the crisis came, he wrote another book about Keynes. And I think that influenced hugely the international debate from 2010 to the present day. So, Robert, you are right, you've been honoured here in Brighton. But you are also very widely acknowledged as somebody who has made a massive contribution to the economic analysis of the world economy and what you can do for it. Some of you here have known him for a long time. I've known him for 35 years. Our relationship is of intermittent intensity. I think neither of us can really manage each other for very long intervals. We're usually brought together in crises, which we instantly solve to our satisfaction, if not to everybody else. You have many achievements. After all, you have been sacked by William Hay. A little known event, but actually a rather important one. It was all over Kosovo. I was, as usual, making my natural compromises and saying that what was going on was that we were straining the UN Charter to its limits, to be met by Robert. Limits? we've torn it up, we've torn the whole thing up. And he resisted and was therefore sacked for refusing to go along with what, to this day, I still think we probably had to. But compromise is something which you do your fair share. But there is a line of principle in your thinking which those of us who know you well and love you respect immensely. There are many, many things that I would talk about, but I'll talk about one. We both know very well a lady of a certain years now died, very old, much older than her. I had known her ever since I was 21. And Rod started getting into this relationship. And with all his skills, which I don't have, charm, empathy, capacity to listen, I suddenly found that this long-established relationship, well, I became rather jealous of what was happening. I would call in aid my long-standing relationship. I used to call her the bag lady of Belgravia. She came from Lithuania, but we were both enriched by knowing her. And I think that you showed to me in that relationship, I learned from you, that this capacity to listen, this capacity to learn, and this capacity to teach, you are a profound leader. And it's a wonderful capacity to teach and to educate, and to be able to do so at every age level. And so, as she went to her eventual death, well into her 90s, you were teaching her, you were teaching us, you were teaching so many people, and with Gus always there, helping, smoothing, charming, and your children. And one of our great joys for Debbie and I has been to see our children get to know your children, and so generations are built together. But friendship is a wonderful thing, and politics doesn't have a hell of a lot of it, actually. And certainly you have enriched my life, you've enriched many people's life, you have educated a whole generation of world leaders, and then when the crunch came, you stood by your views and your writing, and you fought against the unreasonable austerity that was all too easily the accompaniment of the collapse of the last 5 to 6 years. And you were an inspiration for younger people who had read your works, wondered whether, I suspect, you would stand by them, and you stood by them and earned their respect, admiration, and friendship. And for that, we all thank you.
I don't know what to say. It's very moving to have all that said about me. I don't recognise most of it. Certainly, did I write all that stuff when I was 15 or 16 or 17? I can't quite believe it. But thank you very much for all that you've said. I'd like to thank Alexei Grundman for coming to play so wonderfully for us tonight. And Scott Sheridan, Brighton College's Director of Development, Fundraising, I don't know what it is, but who has made sure that things run so smoothly. You've been wonderful. It's been wonderful working with you. Thank you so much. Anthony Selden, I have to thank, who recorded his message, as he couldn't be here. His wife Joanna is very ill. and to both of them, my wife, Gus, and I send our love and best hopes. A Time to Declare was the title of David Owen's autobiography, and I was particularly glad that he could come tonight. I owe to him practically all such advancement as I've had in public life. And he has been a loyal and true friend ever since those exciting times in the SDP. Intermittent but intense friendship. I suppose intermittent because, times passed when we didn't see each other. Whenever we did, we were just as we always were. And we both, and she reminded me of Elizabeth First, who is the bag lady of Belgravia. And I was his successor, really, in Elizabeth First's life. And so we've had lots of wonderful experiences together. But A Time to Declare, it applies to me. It is time for me to declare. And I promise my successor, John Molly, who's here tonight, that there won't be a second innings. So, who should I thank? Many people. Gus, of course. Not for putting up with Brighton College, because Brighton College has been a generous and appreciative taskmaster, but putting up with me as chairman and the demands it made on my time and interest. And I'm not sure she ever understood why I was so interested or wanted to do this, but she was very understanding all the way through and very supportive, and I couldn't have really done it had she not been. So thank you, Gus. Next, Richard Cairns. Richard has been a perfect headmaster. I don't mean that he was the perfect headmaster of Brighton College, though he was. But he was a perfect headmaster for a chairman to have. The number of times we fell out on anything, I can count on the fingers of the hand, and it was never on anything that serious, and it never lasted long. I mean, it's been almost continuous harmony, and I've been so glad that I could really help him in his work, because he has just done the most wonderful job for Brighton College. He's raised it to, heights, and he is a wonderful headmaster. I'm sure many people know that and appreciate it. I just want to put it on record. He is a wonderful headmaster. And it would be wrong for me not to couple my thanks to Richard with my appreciation of Paul Westcott, the bursar. He is not only exceptionally good at being bursar, and so it was to him that the college owes its enormous financial success, but he's also exceptionally kind and extremely funny. I don't know whether people appreciate his sense of humour. I mean, I certainly do. And my spirits always rose when we three, Richard, Paul and I, had quality time together. Then spreading out a little, thanks to the governors, present and future, as my memory flickers over these years, I can recall no serious quarrels, no attempted coups, no plots. I look back on it as a sunny time. Maybe that's just an illusion. Committees are not exactly institutions made for fun. But I remember our meetings as having as many funny moments as such meetings can. They're not, the opportunities are not huge for humour at the Nominations and Governance Committee, or the Finance Committee, or the Development Committee, or the Health and Safety Committee, or any of the other committees, which I occasionally had things to do with. But whenever such opportunities there were taken. Above all, thanks to the working governors, without whom no charity can survive. People like Ian White, Jeff Miller, Neville Abraham, Robert Weir, Michael Choe, Andrew Simons, Joan DeLand, and others over the years who have given as much time as they could from busy lives to make sure the college was properly governed. They're wonderful, wonderful people, and without whose work no government and no chairman of governors could really achieve anything. And then, too, many thanks individually, too many to thank individually from the wide circle of teachers, administrators, parents, pupils, who have helped make being chairman such a rewarding job. So, as I've been called the thinker, I should end with a thought. Over my years here, regulations have marched onwards and onwards and become more and more burdensome. They've increased, they've been imposed on schools and governors, and with an ever tightening noose. Every year, a little extra turn in the screw. I've often wondered where it would end, and I've been emboldened to formulate a Skidelsky law, which is, every regulation, however justified in itself, creates a loophole which will require a further regulation to close, which in turn will give rise to another regulation. So, there is no natural limit to the spread of regulation. No natural limit at all. We can keep hacking away at the tentacles of the octopus, but they'll always start growing again. So, what's the remedy? Well, you can say it in a word. The remedy really is to accept that life has a lot of bad luck in it, as well as good luck. And that not every abuse or every obstacle or problem can be dealt with by regulation. We all enjoy enormously our good luck, but we've got to the state where we can't accept bad luck. And somehow we've got to get some psychological equilibrium in which we can treat those two forces in our lives with some equanimity and be in equilibrium with them. I don't know, whether we ever will get to it, but that is a reflection. So, while we should seek to minimise the possibility of disaster, it's an illusion to think that we can ever entirely avoid it. That's the end of my thought. I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have a couple of gifts to give out today. First of all, I want to just say a little bit about Gus. When you're a headmaster for 11 years, you go to an awful lot of concerts, an awful lot of plays, and as headmaster, you sometimes sit through them and you think, God, this is awful. And when it's the third occasion, you think, God, I must sack the director of drama. But at the end of every one of these concerts or plays, all the governors come out and say, that was marvellous. Except Gus. Alice, I will really miss your ghastly comments. And I have a present for you, which is about to come to Anyway, thank you very much, Alice, from all of us at our college. It does capture him brilliantly, and I decided that a fitting gift for Robert was another portrait by the same artist of Robert, but with the backdrop of the college rather than of the seascape. So perhaps the bursar can unveil it, because I see no one else there to do it. And is Alistair Adams the artist is here? Well, Robert, you need to stand up and admire it. Yes, has paid for this. And Alistair, the artist, said to us that actually he much prefers this version to the one he's left in the college. So Robert, you've got the best deal. But it's got a lovely backdrop of the college rather than the chimney stacks of Kevinton.
Is Alistair here? Alistair?
Yeah.
He's left. He was here.
He is here. Alistair, come out the front.
Behind the lamp.